Everyone, hello and welcome to today's webinar, Digging into Soil Health Principles to Protect Our Water. My name is Alyssa Knox, and I am an Environment and Development Planner here with the North Central Texas Council of Governments, or NCTCOG for short. This webinar is hosted by NCTCOG and funded by the United States Environmental Protection Agency through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So before we dive in today, I want to give you some background on what NCTCOG is. NCTCOG is a voluntary association of local governments. It is one of 24 regional councils here in the state of Texas. As part of NCTCOG's water quality management planning work, we host webinars on water quality and water supply topics every quarter. If you have any ideas on future topics for these webinars, feel free to send them to me. I'm going to give you my email in the chat, and I would love to hear from you because I know our participants always have such great feedback. Okay. So some procedures for the webinar before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and we're going to post it on NCTCOG's Water Resources website, which is available right here. And it's going to be under a green banner called Webinars. And if you did RSVP for this webinar, then you will receive an email with the presentation slides and then a recording link when that becomes available. If you didn't RSVP, but you would like those materials, please email me at the email provided. Please remember also to keep your microphone on mute until the question and answer period to minimize any disruptions. Okay, so let's roll on. Today, we will be hearing from Brian Koch, who will be presenting on planning for healthier soils, as well as Dennis Brezina, who will share with us about combating drought with soil health. And then we will have a brief time for questions after each presentation. Okay, so I'd like to roll in and introduce Brian to everybody. Oh, sorry, my computer started acting up there. Okay. Brian received his Bachelor of Science degree in Rage and Wildlife Management from Texas A&M University, Kingsville in 2003. After a short stint in the commercial nursery business, Brian joined the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board in 2005 as the Regional Watershed Coordinator, serving TSS WCB's Warrenton Regional Office Service Area, covering 47 counties in Southeast and South Central Texas. As Regional Watershed Coordinator, Brian has aided in the development and implementation of several watershed protection plans and total maximum daily load implementation plans, including Plum Creek, Geronimo Creek, Mill Creek, Cedar Bayou, Double Bayou, Bacteria Implementation Group, Mission and Aransas Rivers, Upper San Antonio River, Petronilla, and San Fernando Creeks. He is currently assisting and has assisted in the development and implementation of several more. Brian also represents the agency on the Coastal Coordination Advisory Council, Galveston Bay Estuary Program, and Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries programs, and assists with the TSSWCB's Water Quality Management Program. And now, Brian, you may begin your presentation.
All right, thank you, and hello, everybody. Yes, like Alyssa said, I'm Brian Koch, and I'm down in Wharton, Texas, so my area is a little different. I guess our climate's a little different, maybe a little more humidity and everything. So but the principles I'm going to talk about, you can apply them anywhere you have soil. So we want to go ahead and get into it. Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board is the lead agency in Texas responsible for planning, implementing, and managing programs and practices for abating agriculture and silviculture non-point source water pollution. It's our water quality mandate in the Texas Agriculture Code. That's what the legislature tells us what to do, and that's what we do. So next. We provide technical and financial assistance to the local soil and water conservation districts. What they do, these local districts, they encourage landowners and ag producers to voluntarily conserve natural resources on their private lands through the implementation of best management practices. This results in a positive impact on state water resources to protect soil quality, which supports the strength of Texas agriculture economy. And I will attest to the positive impact because I also am tasked to write our agency's non-point source success stories for the US EPA. And I've been doing that for probably about 12 years. And I have many examples of where implementing conservation practices has improved water quality across the state. Next. Okay, so how we get this done, we have several programs to achieve conservation goals across the state. Today, I'm gonna, after I talk about soil health, I'm gonna talk about our water quality management plan program. But I currently work under our non-point source grant program, and we also have the flood control program, and recently added the on the ground program. And then we have a few others that target carrizo cane on the border and other things. But for the most part, I'm more familiar with the water quality management plan program and the non-point source grant program. So focusing on soil health, there's a few reasons why soil health practices can be beneficial to water quality. We want to increase water holding capacity in the soil because that reduces runoff. I basically, and I said this today, and I don't know if it was the first time I ever said it, but I said, if you're infiltrating water and storing into the ground, then you don't have non-point source pollution. So I don't know if that's a genius statement or not, but I thought it was pretty cool. But another positive impact, increased plant vigor and deeper roots. They increase water infiltration. Reduced tillage and cover crops can help decrease erosion, not just water erosion, but wind erosion as well, and decrease losses of nitrate up to 88% and phosphorus up to 92% in different studies. Additional benefits are possible. So healthy soil, it does give us clean air and water, bountiful crops and forests, productive grazing lands, diverse wildlife, and beautiful landscapes. Soil does all this by performing 5 essential functions. Regulating water. I think that's why most of us are here today. We're talking about water, but soil helps control where rain and irrigation water goes. Water and dissolved solids flow over the land or into and through the soil. Sustaining plant and animal life. The diversity and production of living things depends on the soil. We also filter, and soil also filters and buffers potential pollutants. The minerals and microbes in the soils are responsible for filtering, buffering, degrading, immobilizing, and detoxifying organic and inorganic materials, including industrial and municipal byproducts and atmospheric deposits. And I think what's key, especially on the last point, especially for farmers and ranchers who we work with, but you can apply it in your home garden and your backyard and other things, cycling nutrients. You know, if you're cycling nutrients properly, you don't have to bring in fertilizer, and that saves money. So carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and many other nutrients are stored, transformed, and cycled in the soil. I think this is my big point for why healthy soil matters, especially when I'm talking to groups about water. For every 1% increase in soil organic matter, that results in up to 25,000 gallons of water per acre infiltrated. You know, I see it in my own personal operation. I have a neighbor on the other side of me where I do a little bit of grazing, that when it would rain a half inch to an inch, inch and a half, 2 inches, his yard would always flood. Well, back in March, I had a 4-inch rainfall, and for the first time, I noticed that his yard did not flood. And I walked my pasture and just kind of went through, and it was, kind of spongy and everything, but it definitely did a better job of storing that water. I don't know if I stole the water from him or what, but that made that water, that 4-inch rainfall was made more effective by me practicing health, for soil health. So what does a healthy soil look like? Basically, it's an aggregated or chocolate cake appearance. It's usually darker in color. It's due to the increased organic matter, full of life. A teaspoon of healthy soil contains billions of organisms, and it has a moist but never saturated appearance. What does a healthy soil look like? Continued. I think Dennis has probably seen these pictures before when I did my soil health training. These are some of the examples I used. But all these soils they're the same soil type, and they were all collected within a mile of each other. The soils that have reduced or no tillage in them are my soils that I manage. And then the conventional tillage is a cornfield. Like I said, it's a half mile from my house. Again, same soil type. We get about the same rainfall, everything. but you can definitely tell the difference on the color spectrum. One, the full tillage looks almost rusty in appearance. The red, it's like it's being oxidized. Where the others, the soil that's covered, it's like it's protected and not, it's like if it's cold, it's got a blanket on it. If it's hot outside, it's got sleeves to protect. So that's what I'm trying to get across. But next. So, how do we make our soils healthier? Well, I think first thing is we got to understand our context. I think this gets overlooked so many times. I have people reach out to me and they buy new land, but they never looked at what kind of soils they're getting into. I think if you're interested in buying land and you're interested in producing food, and a lot of people I come in contact that are, I think you need to understand what your soils are capable of. I said these principles apply if you have soil, it doesn't matter where you are, but things are easier or harder depending on which soils you are working with. Just different things. So so your context, understand your context. Next is cover the soil. I mentioned that in the previous slide about the blanket or the sleeves. Um, Reducing soil disturbance. Can be three different types: biological, mechanical, and chemical. You can keep plants growing throughout the year to feed the soil. Diversify as much as possible using crop rotation and cover crops, and incorporate livestock. I did kind of I didn't give this exact version yesterday, but I did give this similar talk yesterday. And I basically told the crowd, I said, the more we follow natural principles, the easier it is to infiltrate water and conserve soil and protect soil. So I think, as we get through the slide, you're going to see how we're following more natural principles, and I can provide examples in each slide. So, first one, understanding your context. What are you managing for? Are you have a 100 square foot garden, or do you have 10,000 acres of grazing land? What are you managing for? Where are you located? What's your climate? I'm in Southeast Texas. It's a very humid day, and at 90 degrees, it feels like it's about 110 out there. What's your soil type? Are you a clay? Are you a loam? Are you a sand? Are you a sandy loam? All that matters. Then any other factors that influence your decisions. Do you market garden? Do people care about organic? Do they care about animal welfare? Do they, what are these factors? I think a lot of that plays into how you manage your soils. And then the next principle is covering the soil. Now, I've got several pictures on here. Most of the pictures are out of my yard and gardens. And there's a couple different things I've used. I've used hay. That hay on the, I guess, looking at the screen on the left-hand side, that's actually how I grow my potatoes. I try to do no dig or no till on the potatoes. So basically, if you've ever planted potatoes, you cut the eyes, and I put them in ash for different reasons. Keep the bugs off and the other things. But then I put them in a row, and then I cover them with hay or straw or some sort of cover medium. Going on the bottom, the next one is wood chips. Wood chips are great. They're pretty darn available, especially when you have areas where they do a lot of tree trimming and stuff. A lot of times, if you see the people trimming the trees in your neighborhood, a lot of times they'll give you those wood chips. Just something to be careful with wood chips. If you incorporate them into the soil, they will rob you of nitrogen and stuff. But merely covering the ground with them, it's a little different process. You don't have as much nitrogen being taken up by them, because basically when they get in the ground, they're trying to be broken down, and that organic material is being turned into organic matter. The next little picture on the bottom right, that's actually I used a cover crop. I think it was like some sort of annual ryegrass or something, annual ryegrass or wheat, or one of those cool season grasses. It got up to a certain height, and then I terminated it. And I didn't use chemicals. I think I used some large pieces of tin, and it was long enough to get rows, and then I planted squash in between them. So I'm protecting that ground. The middle picture on the top, that's actually some cropland down in Victoria County in Texas. The farmer has been actively no-till and cover crops since about 2008 or 2009. So he had many years into the practice. And a neat story about him, he actually, about 2016 or 17, stopped applying phosphorus as a fertilizer because through the biological activity that was stimulated by protecting the soil, it was made bioavailable. So he was actually starting to cycle those nutrients and his input costs were going down. Next slide. So minimizing disturbance, that's our next principle. We want to, it's a good start to reduce or to start rebuilding soil aggregates, pore spaces, soil glue, and soil organic matter. It's a simple, essential step for long-term soil productivity. So it can occur in different forms. You have biological disturbance, such as overgrazing, which limits the plant's ability to harvest CO2 and sunlight. I like to tell people that your leaves are like solar panels, and they do a great job of taking that sun's energy and converting it to sugars, which I will get into a little more detail later. Chemical disturbance, over application of nutrient and pesticide. That can disrupt soil food web function. There's a lot of pesticides that kill soil microbes. So if you get in a case where you have to use something, understand what you're doing and use it, read that label. The label is the law, as Texas Department of Agriculture likes to say. Make sure you understand those labels and understand, the effects of what that chemical could do, not only to what you're spraying, but to other things, because it does affect other things. And then physical disturbance, tillage or overuse of an area by livestock or mowing too short. We get a lot of overgrazing, and not just down here in Southeast Texas, but all over the state. And I think it doesn't contribute to all our water quality problems, but it doesn't help a lot of our water quality problems. At least if there's grass on the pasture, you are having some sort of mitigation of pollution. But the better you graze, the smarter you graze, the better you're going to take care of that water. Next. So ultimately, with tillage, you results in one or more of the following. You have more water erosion. You transport soil and nutrient water to offsite locations, which negatively impacts water quality and quantity. Wind erosion does the same thing, but just via the wind. My family, my mom and dad are from Rivera, Texas, and if you know where Rivera, Texas is, it's south of Corpus Christi, and the wind blows a lot down there. And historically, there was a lot of farmland, and they like to plow. But you have lines of soil piled up along old fence lines because they like to plow so much. The wind erosion moved that soil to those fence lines. Since then, a lot of farmers have incorporated minimum tillage and no-till, and that has minimized a lot of it in the areas, but they still have a lot, and I think more work definitely could be done in that direction. Ponding of water, it's water that stays on the saturated on the surface for long periods of time. Heck, we haven't had the rainfall here in Wharton County as much as some of the other folks, but we did have about an inch last week over the area, and I drove by some fields yesterday that the water ponded, and it didn't, and it's been dry. So, there's definitely some issues with that. We're not cycling that water effectively. Crusting easily, again, another story. We plant a lot of cotton down here, and the time of year you plant cotton, late March, early April, and you get those showers. Sometimes you get those showers, it might rain a quarter of an inch. Well, what that will do, that'll crush that soil surface and the seed can't emerge. And I know a couple years ago we had so much bad crusting that a couple farmers had to plant once or twice again. So that's costing money. We're trying to save money and reduce input. So there's that's definitely not helping that. And then ultimately soil organic matter depletion. So when you see wind erosion, a lot of that soil you see blowing in the air is your soil organic matter, and that's what we need to build that soil. So here's a couple of different examples. The top is a soil it's a sandy sandy loam that by all our soil definitions and stuff should infiltrate water pretty good just by its nature. And then the bottom, that's a heavy clay. I don't know if it was a Lake Charles clay or Victoria clay. I apologize for that, but both very similar in nature. It's a very dominant soil we have down here in south central Texas. But it's the management styles. That one at the top is it's plowed and disturbed a lot, not just with tillage, but with chemical use and just trips over the field. So you have this compaction. Well, you have these rows that are holding, and that was that. And then the bottom soil. So practices, how you farm matters, and it affects not only our water quality but water quantity as well. So maximizing plant diversity. We can start to mimic the original plant community by using crop rotations, which include cover for crop types. Diverse rotations can provide more biodiversity, benefiting the soil food web, which in turn improves rainfall infiltration and nutrient cycling while reducing disease and pests. Crop rotations can also be designed to include crops which are high water users, low water users, taproot, fibrous, high carbon crops, low carbon crops, legumes, and non-legumes, to name a few. So if you've ever been out to a prairie restoration site or just a native prairie, you don't see one species. It's not just grass. There's grass. There might be some shrubs. There could be some, bushes. Forbs, wildflowers. Texas is famous for wildflowers. When you drive through the wildflowers, it's not just bluebonnets. It's bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, Indian blank. You name it, it's out there. And that's the idea. We're mimicking nature. We want to bring that diversity into our crop rotations. Next. Here's a couple of different examples. That bottom picture is a seed mix I came up with. I get crazy in the garden sometimes, and that's my chaos mix. And the top middle is the result of that mix, and then that other is just a warm season cover crop. I try to do different things. Again, I'm it's going back to understanding my context. I'm trying to figure out what works for me best, because down here our growing season is a lot longer than a lot of other places, and there are definitely a lot of definitely a lot of challenges to achieving those goals. Maintaining continuous living roots. Plants have the ability to feed the soil through photosynthesis. I think this is kind of basic biology, basic science. But it's using the sun's energy to create food, or the sugars or liquid carbon, and it moves it through the plant to the roots, helping boost soil microbes and other soil life. This basically creates an economy built on a liquid carbon pathway that barters sugars for nutrients between the plants and soil biology. This is important in maintaining living plants throughout the year or as long as possible. Perennial plants are ultimately the best soil builders and are key to developing long-term health. I mentioned the prairies earlier. A lot of perennial plants out there, especially the grasses. And, if you look at historic, accounts of the prairies, and especially in, Texas, being, as tall as the back of the horseback and everything, well, you probably had some, organic matter percentages in the, 4 to 5%, maybe higher, just depending on where you are. And that was built on perennial plants and grazing, and it's just a lot of that interaction. Next slide. Here's some examples again from mine. I was on the left hand side. That's some tomatoes that I transplanted into a terminated whatever cool season grass that is. The next is what they call a tillage radish. If you want to, that big root helps break up compaction, but I think we underestimate how much little roots are help break up compaction. But I think it's a good visual. If you've ever used a sharpshooter shovel, you know how tall it is. I'm about 6'3", and that handle comes up to about the top of my belly. So that tall. So that's a lot of root action and a lot of leaf action on the top. Then the next is just to overview some radish and peas and cool season grass that I use as a cover crop. Now, livestock integration. I think, we hear, a lot about climate and, cattle being bad and things like that. But, our prairies didn't become what they were without grazing ruminants. Now, we had millions of bison that would, come up and down the plains, but it wasn't just bison. There were elk and deer and pronghorn and other things. And they function pretty similar to a cow. They're both grazing ruminants. They both get pretty good size, full grown, 1,200 to 2,000 pounds, depending on, cow or bull. And, so they're it was either one or the other. So bringing animals back into a lot of these systems helps them helps them recover. And so over the time, we've had that synergistic role. In recent years, we're seeing how animals are being taken off the land and placed in confinement, and then fewer farms include livestock as part of their overall operation. And if we look at this at an ecosystem level, when you remove a component of the ecosystem, it breaks or it doesn't function properly. And that when grazing ruminants have been taken off, it starts to malfunction. And I think that's part of a result of what we're seeing. Next slide. But how do we return livestock to the landscape? We can graze those cover crops. I know in the Panhandle, there's a lot of wheat growing up there, and a lot of time of the year after they plant the wheat, they graze that wheat. So they're already it's already kind of being done in some areas. But there's also can be residue from the previous crop that they can graze. But I just remember hearing stories of people back in the old days, and I'm say the old days. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, but I remember people turning cows on an old cornfield, and they talked about how fat those cows would get. Well, if those cows were getting fat off of that, they're cycling nutrients back in too. So they're doing a lot of good things. So that field was probably in a better, healthier condition because it had cows on it. But next one, summer grazing, full season cover crops, allowing plant recovery, and then a second grazing during the fall or winter. Winter feeding on hayland fields by rolling out the hay bales or bale grazing in rotational seeding of perennials and graze as part of the crop rotation. So basically, we're incorporating that into our principles. Next. Here's a few pictures. I think, let's see, the pigs and sheep and goats are not mine, but everything else is. Chickens are great soil builders. I think they give us eggs, and the white ones down at the bottom, those are my meat chickens. I do meat chickens about twice a year, and not only they guard on the table, but they give me a lot of fertility. And then egg layer chickens, they do a lot. Yeah, they both scratch the ground and poop and do other things. And then cattle, cattle are great. I mentioned grazing ruminants. There's just something about the animal grazing and the grass responding and the manure that comes out of the back end. So there's a lot of good that can be done when it's done following principles. So my next part, I'm going to talk about how we can incorporate conservation practices or soil health conservation practices into our water quality management plan program. So the program history was created by the 73rd Legislature in 1993 through Senate Bill 503. We're often heard the 503 program or 503 plans, 503 cost share. It's a voluntary program, except for in the 77th Legislature in 2001. The poultry industry kind of went to the legislature and said, hey, help us be a little more responsible in managing our manure. So on dry litter poultry operations, which are usually the smaller ones, without the lagoons and everything like that, they still have a lot of manure, so it has to be managed. Well, they reached out to us or to the legislature, and we, as the non-point source agency, we went ahead and assisted. So we have a poultry office out of Nacogdoches, plus some satellite offices that handle the poultry program. So that's a little bit of the history of the program. So basically, a water quality management plan is a site-specific plan for the land improvement measures developed through the Soil and Water Conservation District for agricultural lands. It provides farmers a voluntary opportunity to achieve a level of pollution prevention or abatement consistent with state water quality standards. That includes appropriate and essential land treatment practices, production management measures, or technologies applicable to the planned land use. Best available management and technology as described in our NRCS Field Office Tech Guide. So Dennis, who's speaking next, is their NRCS. They're our federal partner when it comes to doing this. So we couldn't do it without them. Water quality management plans cover the entire farm or ranch. They're specifically designed to achieve pollution prevention and abatement. And there's some great bedtime reading in the Texas Water Codes, 6.121, if you would like to get into further detail on that. Water quality management plans are site-specific plans with a combination of best management practices for the treatment of identified resource concerns. Excuse me, just for a second. Sorry. So it's based on soil type, planned land use and production goals, known potential water quality or natural resource problems, and any other site-specific factors. The technical criteria, again, I mentioned that Field Office Tech Guide, and I think this is still the same website, but basically you can Google search NRCS Photog or Field Office Technical Guide, and you can find this, this information here. But essential practices for each land use, so we cover agriculture, so anything from cropland, promote that.
Hey, Brian, can you
Yes.
lean in a little bit more? When you lean back, it muffles you a little bit.
Sorry about
there
that.
you go. Now we can hear you.
All right. So going back to cropland, we want to, promote conservation crop rotation and conservation tillage. Now that crop rotation can include a cover crop, whether it's grazed or left on the land to just keep the land covered. Pasture land and range land, that's obviously grazing land. We just want to make sure that we're maintaining, we're not grazing grass below the minimum heights, and we want to provide livestock water. And placement of livestock water is important in pastures. We use this as a practice to place away from streams to keep animals out of streams, because I think y'all's part of the world, and I know, east and northeast of us, the past few weeks have seen a lot of rain, and fencing off the stream a lot of times it's not that ideal, because you're going to have to end up replacing fence. And that livestock water is really good for bringing the cows or other livestock away from the stream at a lower cost and lower maintenance of building the fence. Wildlife management, we have that as a practice as well. And then forest management. A lot of our forest BMPs are handled through the Texas Forest Service. We actually have a 319 grant with them ongoing that's been going on since the late 90s. And that's how our silviculture portion of our mandate gets handled. So we have a lot of partners statewide on that. But the plans also include nutrient management, pest management, animal waste management system, waste utilization, and irrigation water management. Why would a producer sign up for a WQMP? Well, we want to abate and prevent erosion and promote conservation. It's a strategic management plan for the operation. It's an assurance policy as well. Through that mandate through the legislature, it's written in there that, if you get one of these plans and you follow it and you follow the practices, the state will stand behind you in case there's a complaint or other maybe possible regulatory action related to water, and it acts basically as a permit for that property. We want to demonstrate that voluntary conservation programs promote ag production and environmental quality as compatible goals. I mentioned earlier the success stories. I think that I have enough evidence across the state that tells those stories quite well. And then demonstrate that agriculture is doing our part to protect water quality. Again, those success stories, we use a lot of that. So we have that. And then we want to resolve water quality complaints through voluntary process with the local soil and water district and the state board. All right. So what does the plan contain? The district cooperator agreement. This is basically the producer cooperator saying, hey, I'm willing to work with the district. Uh, the request for planning assistant, again, it's voluntary, so we want you request for us to come write the plan. Then there's soils maps and interpretations of the soils, a conservation plan map, so it tells you where to implement the practices or and whatever you're implementing. And then a narrative record of decisions or practices that needed to implement the plan. Then an implementation schedule indicating years practice are to be applied. Worksheets that are used during the inventory and planning processes. NRCS practice standards and engineering designs, and a signature sheet to verify individuals' privacy. So I'm not gonna go say, hey, Bob over here got this water quality management plan, and he got 2 miles of cross fence built and 2 water troughs and a water well, and he got this much money. I can't do that. But if Bob wants to tell you all about it, he can. But it's not. I can't do it. I can get in trouble. So we want to make sure we have that confidentiality between the landowner and the public. How do we get a water quality management plan? Individual request planning assistance, again, voluntary. The plan is usually developed by a soil and water conservation district technician with NRCS and state board assistance. I'm going to tell you, out of our regional office, we do write the bulk of the water quality management plans out of our office. But then the plan is approved by the landowner first, the district, the NRCS, and then certified by the state board. The producer implements the plan on their land, and then annual status reviews are conducted to ensure that the landowner implements practices agreed to in the implementation schedule. There is financial assistance. We do have state assistance, that 503 program I talked about. And then in certain watersheds, I don't know if Lake Lavon is in y'all's area, but I do believe we have a soil and water technician in that watershed that has the Section 319 funding. And then the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, has the many programs under the Farm Bill, and we rely on all those to implement conservation practices.
Okay.
Now I will take questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Brian. As Brian said, we do have time for questions. We'll do that in one of two ways. You can use the raise your hand feature, and I will call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can place your question in the chat. We already have a question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read that. What considerations would you suggest to minimize soil compaction or disturbance with livestock incorporation? Is that through managing the number and rotating grazing, or what is the best way to minimize that disturbance?
So basically, and this goes back to that principle of context, what are you managing for? So you want to understand how much land you're capable, how much livestock your land is capable of carrying. You have a carrying capacity. And then you figure that out. But then we, through our water quality management plans, we always have rotational grazing, whether it's an intensive system where you're moving daily, or moving once every couple weeks or month, depending on the size of the pasture. But yes, it goes back to managing the number of animals and rotational grazing. A lot of times we found through managing that grass through that rotational grazing, you can actually increase stocking rates, and you can use animal impact. It sounds almost counterintuitive, but you can use animal impact and animal density to do things to not only improve water quality, but you can fix weed problems or brush problems or other things as well, just depending on how you follow the principles and follow that. But yes, basically we want to just look at what the land can handle, and then work on rotational grazing. And when we talk about rotational grazing, we want to make sure that we graze not further down than the minimum height, and then actually have adequate rest and recovery of the plant before we bring the animal back onto that spot. So it's not just rotate them and then 2 weeks later bring them back on, because depending on what you're grazing, Bermuda grass or Bahia or something like that, I think the fastest recovery I've had on Bermuda grass has been that I've seen personally in my operation has been about 25 days. And that was with pretty decent rainfall. When we're getting into native grasses and other things, you might need 90, 100 days, might need a full year, depending on where you are. Again, context. We got to understand what we're managing for.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Brian? Okay. I see one come in. Do you have any thoughts on the addition of compost to agricultural land for water quality?
At a large scale, it's kind of hard, but I think if you can incorporate it, it's beneficial. The thing is the scale of it, and that's where we can get into things like cover crops and other things, because in nature, a lot of times we don't really see composting, but we see mulching. And we have a lot of live oaks down here, and when you walk through that, live oak forest, especially in the fall or the spring, they drop a lot of leaves and they pile up and they break down. So I think I think probably the takeaway outside of context, the two most important things you can do for your land is minimize disturbance and keep it covered. And that's mulching and stuff. And a lot of times that'll build that compost too. So, you just kind of, look at how nature does things and see what's happening there and then try to mimic that.
Great, thank you. That was a great question. We have time for maybe one more. Could you talk about the use of prescribed burns in addition to animals and mechanical?
I, as far as prescribed burns, yeah, I know they happened on the landscape, but I think if you get into, I think in addition to animals, they're great. But you have a lot of places where they try to replace that with animals, and you start losing plant diversity, and you start getting large spacing between the plants. So you create more bare ground. So I think prescribed burns with, again, adequate recovery before you graze it, and in that combination work a lot better than just prescribed burns by themselves. That's I do a lot of work with Galveston Bay Estuary Program, and there's a lot of people doing great work down there restoring prairies. And it's hard for them to get animals into those areas because they're in the middle of Houston or Clear Lake or one of these towns down there. And if they could incorporate animals, there's some people that say, heck yeah, I would, because we know it would cycle our nutrients and stuff, but they rely on burning. So they have to just be careful and cognizant of using the burning and stuff, because it can lead to those negative effects.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Brian has placed his contact information on the slide you see here. Like I said, that will be emailed out to you. So if you have further questions, you're welcome to reach out to him in any one of those formats. Okay, so now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dennis Brezina. Dennis graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Agronomy, Soil, and Crop Management from Texas A&M University and interned with Servitech, a crop consulting company in Southwest Kansas. In 1989, Dennis started with the USDA Soil Conservation Service working on the soil survey of Limestone County, Texas. He eventually became the soil survey project leader of the Kennedy and Kleberg Counties soil survey in 1997 and has worked on soil survey details for Burleson, Edwards, Rio Colorado County, Duval, Goliad, Zapata, and Presidio counties. In 2005, he became the NRCS Resource Soil Scientist for Zone 4 in Bryan, Texas. And in October of 2019, he became the Texas State Soil Health Specialist. Dennis, welcome, and you may begin your presentation. You're muted.
Helps to turn the mic on. Have to be smarter than the computer. Thank you very much, Alyssa. I kind of realized while Brian was giving his presentation that I don't believe I actually put my contact information in my slide set. So I went ahead and posted it up there. And then also too, while I was thinking of it, Brian mentioned some programs, and I wanted to go ahead and offer some links to some of that as well. So I put that in the chat box. And just, when we think about combating drought with soil health, we really have to go ahead and on the next slide, please. You actually combat those conditions of drought before it occurs. And I think Ace Reed said it's much easier to prevent the barn from catching fire than to try and put it out. So I could not find that cartoon, but I found another one about grazing management of that. So I went ahead and added that. But once you're into summer and drought, there's really not a whole lot that you can do except to plan for the fall and next year's crop. So you really do need to work on those things prior to getting into the summer. Next slide, please. I had a conversation recently as to how much better we farm today, and I really do agree with that because we have better equipment, we have more knowledge, so things are a lot better overall. But we still have some folks that are farming up and down the slope, and they're even farming over the terraces. Some of that's because of equipment. Now we've got 30-row planters and that, so we've outgrown the terraces that we had originally had. So you'll sometimes see sedimentation coming off of conventionally tilled cropland like that photo up on the top. We also have gully erosion that's coming off of conventionally tilled fields. These are just down on a bar ditch along an area outside of Temple, Texas, and we're still combating wind erosion as well, and that's all of those things that we're having to deal with, and we're trying to fight that through our agency and through the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board, along with Brian's agency as well. Go ahead and hit that next button, and that top photo reminded me about a booklet that Dr. W.C. Loudermilk had written back in the 1940s, Conquest of the Land Through 7,000 Years, where European farmers were loading up a cart with the soil that had washed down the hill from the previous year to move it back up to the top of the hill. And in this particular photo, I also provide a link to that document, and that y'all may be able to go to sometime and look at that. Next slide, please. Sometimes I wonder if we should actually be asking ourselves, how well are we actually farming? We've all heard of multiple vehicle crashes that shut down the highway due to an intense dust storm. And I haven't heard of it happening yet. And I want to make it clear that I'm not advocating this. But one of these days, folks are going to start looking at liability in these cases. And you don't have to necessarily prove these things for them to be costly. Last year, in May, 8 people were killed in a dust storm crash along Interstate 35 south of Springfield, Illinois. And 72 vehicles were involved in that crash and 37 people were injured. So it's just kind of mentioning that issue that we're still having to deal with. Next slide, please. We sometimes have a tendency to think that erosion is a thing of the past and that we've beaten it. Those photos that are on the left are from the Dust Bowl, while those are on the right are from 2008. And it's really going to take a paradigm shift to overcome the financial and cultural barriers of conservation tillage, of conventional tillage. We just think that that's what we have to do to open up the soil to get the infiltration into it. Next slide, please. Erosion actually starts with raindrop splash, and there's a link to that particular photo right there. We do not have a video of that, but I did provide a link to Arizona State University has developed a great raindrop splash video that demonstrates that impact. And you can see how the crater and the forms and the particles become detached. Go ahead, and can we run that video, maybe?
It opens separately as a separate video. It doesn't include it in the Teams presentation. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. That works out also. The photo there really kind of shows that where the raindrop impacts that bare soil, and the soil particles become detached, and they eventually get into solution. And so that's why that water that's in that photo is not really clear. It's cloudy with the sediment that's there, and that's where erosion is actually starting in that raindrop splash right there. And I also kind of thought about also that there's an additional link that I posted there. Got to thinking about how about the speed of a raindrop splash. And of course it depends, but it according to the intensity of that storm, but the speed of gravity is about 9 meters per second, so that's around 20 miles per hour. So I got to thinking about what if that raindrop were a car. And so that bottom video is actually a video from the National Highway Traffic Safety Association, and it's showing the impact of a 20-mile-per-hour crash, which is really sounds kind of slow, but it's amazing how bad that impact can be. And I'm just glad that raindrops aren't the size of sedans. Next slide, please. Brian already talked about this a little bit, but this is the fundamentals of it in that. So soil health, the continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living system. And we have a tendency to think of soil as just a medium to grow things and not as a living system that sustains plant and animal health. And again, as Brian mentioned, the 5 soil principles are: cover the soil, minimize the disturbance, not necessarily eliminate it, but just to minimize it at least. Include that plant diversity. We want to look at 3 or 4 species or functional groups also. And you want to keep a living root in the ground all year, because that's where the structure of the soil actually comes from, is with that root living and growing through the soil. And when it's possible, integrate that livestock as well. Next slide, please. It's really just a new look and an old practice. Thomas Jefferson used turnips, buckwheat, and vetch as cover crops for Monticello in 1794. And he wrote in a letter to John Taylor that indeed I'd like to think of it important to separate my exhausted crops by alternations of ameliorators. It's hard for me to say a 6-syllable word like that, so hopefully I got pretty close on that. But again, it's just really a new look at an old practice. Next slide, please. In my soil and water conservation course in 1987, I learned of a 1930s Iowa study that was on continuous corn versus a rotation of corn plus oats and sweet clover. After 10 years of that rotation, the yield had almost doubled on that rotation. And then it was almost tripled after 15 years, and almost quadrupled after 20 years. Now, I do want to call your attention that the change didn't happen overnight, and even after 5 years, there was not a huge difference. So this does take time, but you really do have to. You have to start sometime, or you have to start somewhere, and so it just takes time. It took time for that soil to over repeated plowing to lose the structure that it had, and it takes time for that soil to develop that structure back as well. After that study, no one in Iowa wanted to grow continuous corn, and then along comes year 21, and they applied 180 pounds of nitrogen to both test fields, and the continuous corn grew 103 bushel per acre corn, while the rotation did a little bit worse at 98 bushels. And so folks just thought that, well, I don't have to change the way that I'm managing my cropland to do that. But we do have to remember, how much did fertilizer cost in 1960? It was a byproduct at that time, and so it was really cheap. And so really after they they added that fertilizer, it was as if the study had never really happened. And I'm not against fertilizer. I don't think that at all, but I am against over fertilizing, because you're wasting your money in that process as well. And you're also causing some environmental issues as well. Next slide, please. Soil health is not for everyone. You know, can a farmer in the Panhandle easily add animals? Or for that matter, along the Gulf Coast Prairie, the Blackland Prairies, or even in the Brazos River bottom? You know, that being said, there are some folks that are starting to do that with electric fencing, and that's, as Brian mentioned, that we've got it in all of those areas where folks are doing. Also, you know, most farmers and ranchers are already farming the best they know how. Our agencies are here to try to help them and give them some ideas and give them some additional management options that they can use. We typically ask the producer, what do they want? Do they want to maximize their yields? Do they want the newest equipment? Do they want to get the first bale of cotton? You know, that's a big item in some areas of the state, and that whoever gets that bragging rights of having that first bale really means a lot to them. Then maybe they want to maximize their income, but in maximizing their income, they need to think also too, how much inputs did they put into that? So did they really maximize their profit, or when they were maximizing that income? So I like to think of it as optimum yield, and what you really would like to do is maximize that profit. Next slide, please. A little bit of hydrology 101. What happens to raindrop when it hits the ground? Well, it either soaks into the ground or it runs off. Steve Nelly was a NRCS retired biologist. He used to say, we want to think of it as water catchment, not as a watershed, because we really do need to catch every inch of water that Mother Nature gives us in that. Next slide, please. Since we're not live and I can't show you a rainfall simulator demonstration, this photo is from the Milan experiment station in Tennessee, and it compares the clear water that's coming off the no-tilled field on the left to the sediment-laden water coming off the conventionally tilled field on the right. In a lot of ways, it's a bit like the Rio Negro and Amazon rivers coming together in Brazil. I've also included a link down at the bottom to a demonstration video by Doug Peterson. He's a retired USDA NRCS soil health specialist, and it's a really good video showing that rainfall simulator demonstration. Next slide, please. Compaction and penetration resistance in soils can also often be seen in the natural world as roots running laterally on the top of a compacted layer. The photo on the left shows multiple plow pan layers and poor soil structure on a Houston black soil in Navarro County, Texas. These plow pans can cause poor root development. And in the natural world, we usually see this as what we call J or L rooting, where the roots are growing laterally and rather than down. So are these roots, if they're growing laterally like that, are they going to be able to take up water and nutrients from deeper in the soil? Well, no, it's going to be a lot more difficult. You know, in that case, that's a cotton plant right there. That should have about a 10-inch taproot right there, and it's only going down about 3 or 4 inches, and that so that is a bit of an issue as well. Next slide, please. To expand upon that last slide, these photos were taken only 6 minutes apart on the same Houston black soils near Navarro County, Texas. And I want to call your attention to look at a couple of things in this photo. Look at the difference in structure between the two soils. You see good aggregates, good soil structure in the photo on the left, whereas you see, well, at least a couple of plow pans in the soil on the right. But the biggest thing that I see in that, especially keep in mind that these are really are just across the road from each other. Look at the difference in moisture of the two soils. there's good moisture in the soil on the right, on the left, and then there's not much moisture at all in the soil on the right. And the rooting depth of that corn plant seedling on the right is also being affected. And you almost have to ask yourself, which corn seedling would you rather be? Next slide, please. Have you ever heard of the term evapotranspiration?
Yes.
Well, this is the sum of all the processes by which water moves from the land surface to the atmosphere via evaporation and transpiration of the plant. This is a USGS definition here. But Dr. Dwayne Beck, and I provided a link down at the bottom of this as well, from the Dakota Lakes Research Farm, he emphasizes a key point surrounding cover crops and water holding capacity. And Dr. Beck's saying is to take the E out of the ET, or in other words, take the evaporation out of evapotranspiration. And so transpiration is important. The plant can't live without transpiring, but it can live without that evaporation. So that's the big key with that particular quote. Next slide, please. Mother Nature only gives us so much rainfall. So it's what you do with that rainfall that you receive that's important. Here's an example of a no-till versus a conventional till. It's probably also fallow outside the growing season. Did that field on the right just receive more rain? Well, probably not, but conventional tillage actually reduces the rainfall infiltration and it increases ponding. Brian kind of talked about that as well. Our bare soils can actually lose over half of its rainfall to evaporation. And some of our landscapes, if you got slope, they actually lose over 90% of the rainfall from a combination of that evaporation and runoff. The last month in Central Texas, we've received a lot of rain, but not all of that rain went into the ground. And it also caused a lot of erosion in those last couple of big rains that we've had. Next slide, please. This is cotton on 60-inch rows that was planted into a rolled. They used a roller crimper on cereal rye cover crop, and it's showing just planting it into a cover crop like that. Is there any chance of raindrop splash or wind erosion off this field? Likely not. You're going to see almost all the raindrops that hit are going to end up infiltrating into that soil. And that cover is also protecting that soil from erosion and helping that soil to capture every drop of rain. This is from near Idalou, Texas in the Panhandle. Next slide, please. Soil structure is influenced by the management of the site. And this is where humans come in. We're managing the soil. So that's where that soil structure is coming from. And oftentimes you can see the difference. And one thing I encourage you to do is to examine the soil in your field and then compare it to a shovel slice that's along a fence line or another undisturbed area nearby. Try to make sure you're getting the same soil, but just compare that difference. And oftentimes you'll be able to see a vast difference in there. The photo on the left, it's showing a soil from along a fence line with good structure, whereas the soil in the bottom part of that photo has multiple plow pan layers. And there's just another photo of that plow pan layer in the photo that's on the right. Next slide, please. I sampled these soils from our residue management and cover crop study that we had in Guadalupe County about 4 years ago. In the cover crop field up on the top, the first thing I noticed, and point to issue about this, they've actually been ridge tilling here since about 2013. They're not no-tilling there, so that's I do want to make that distinction. But there, you can even see a difference just by using ridge till versus conventionally tilled there on the bottom. the first thing that I noticed was that improved structure in the surface of that soil, but then it also dawned on me that it was cool to the touch. And the soil temperature at that topsoil was actually 80 degrees, and there was moisture in that upper 6 inches of that sample. Whereas when I went across the road and looked at the conventionally tilled field on the bottom, the soil was pulverized and structureless. There was no moisture at all in the upper 6 inches, and the soil was hot to the touch. And when I measured it, it was at 115 degrees. If I'd sampled it in the afternoon, I'm sure the soil temperature had been well over 120 degrees in this particular case. Next slide, please. And speaking of soil temperature, this diagram illustrates what happens to soil moisture and the plant. At 75 degrees, 100% of the moisture in the soil is being used for plant growth. So everything's going to that plant. At 95 degrees, 85% of that moisture is actually being lost through evapotranspiration. And then only 15% of your soil moisture is being used for that plant growth at 105 degrees soil temperature. All of that moisture is being used for cooling of the plant so it doesn't die. So that plant's trying to stay alive and it's trying to cool itself. And then at 140 degrees, your soil bacteria and other microbes start to die or go dormant at 140 degrees. This is actually based upon some work that was done by William Coos and J.J. McIntyre, who worked for our former agency, the USDA Soil Conservation Service. That's what we started out as. We changed our name in the mid-90s, back in 1963. And they referred to the crop residues and soil cover as air conditioning for the soil. So we really learned this a long time ago. We've just kind of forgotten some of these things, and we need to kind of revisit some of this as well. Next slide, please. Try this experiment on your property. I'd like you to try to do the slate test. And I referenced Doug Peterson's video earlier, and I have a video link in there. So take some time if you can to look at Doug's video, because he also does a slate test in addition to a rainfall simulator. You can take a mason jar, fill it with water, and then build a cage with rabbit wire so that you can hold a soil aggregate or clod. And just take about a walnut size sample from the soil from 2 differently managed fields and place them in the water. Now, the soil on the left is along the fence line in this case, and it's in the field on the right in the conventionally tilled field. And you can see soil is falling apart in both of those particular soils. But with that more well-managed field with the fence line there, the soil's not becoming dispersed and suspended as it is in the conventionally tilled sample. The individual particles of sand, silt, and clay are actually starting to break down, and those particles are going into suspension in that water. So now think about it, if that's an actual rainfall event and all those particles are starting to be suspended in that water, where are they going to go? They're going to start to run off the field, run into the ditch, and eventually into our streams and rivers and that. And that's what's happening in the Milan, Tennessee photo as well that we looked at earlier. Excuse me. I collected this conventionally tilled soil in mid-August. This is Houston Black, kind of east of Salado, Texas. And look at those fist-sized clods. I didn't put anything in the photo for as a size comparison, but these clods are actually about fist-sized. How well can water infiltrate into that soil since there's no soil structure and no porosity? It can infiltrate in between, and eventually it's going to start to wear that down. But likely they're going to end up having to till this field again to try to break those large clods down into smaller clods. So by using strip till or no till you're actually improving that soil structure and adding porosity to your soil. Next slide, please. These two shovel slices were taken about 20 yards from each other. They're from the USDA Agricultural Research Service grassland station at Riesel, Texas. The soil on the left was from a fence line, and the soil on the right is from a compacted field where you can see the structure difference that's there. Also, too, in this particular photo, it demonstrates it very well, especially since these are only 20 yards apart. Look at the difference in color that you have with these two soil. The soil with the good structure, good tilth, is much darker in color, and that organic matter is what's giving soil that darker color in that, and so this is allowing that soil to be that living organism and not just a medium of growth. Next slide, please. Brian mentioned soil crust a little while back, and they often develop on the surface of conventionally tilled soils after rains or irrigation. And these crusts can affect your rainfall infiltration, and also they affect your seed germination and plant growth of the seedlings. And that sometimes the crust can be so bad that they have to replant their field, as Brian mentioned. Next slide, please. Early this spring, I went to the field to look at some sites after the recent rains, and these two photos were taken about 30 yards apart from each other near San Gabriel, Texas, just east of Taylor. And they kind of illustrate nature's version of that slate test. The producer on the left's been doing no-till since the 1990s, and he was actually utilizing a multi-species cover crop in this particular case. That no-till is looking to the southwest, and while that conventionally tilled field is looking to the northeast. Slopes on both of the fields are about 3%, and look again at that difference in the water clarity and the sediment load in those two fields. Again, it really does look a lot like where the Amazon and Rio Negros rivers come together in Brazil, and so that's just another example of that. Next slide, please. And I don't know if these videos will work or not.
We can try, because I think these are embedded.
Yeah, these are just photos that I took myself. So there's that same field on the left coming off the no-till field. And then on the right, this is actually from near Yarlton, Texas, along 485. And the water coming off that field has actually caused a gully in the ditch. And further down the ditch, it's about 1 foot to 18 inches deep as you go further down that ditch. And then, so there's just some examples of the difference in water running. And these two sites are 25, maybe 30 miles apart from each other in that same blackland prairie, Houston black type soils. Next slide, please. So, soil health is truly a journey, and you just have to decide which direction you'd like to go. And that, I think, is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge with us. We do have time again for questions before we wrap up. Again, you can raise your hand and I will call on you to unmute, or you can put a question in the chat. I did have a question while folks are thinking. Now that we are rolling into summer, I know that you said that really planning for drought is a long-term process. Are there things people can do this summer that maybe they failed to plan ahead? Does that mean that our crops are just 100% going to die? And this, I'm even talking about like personal gardens people have in their backyards, or are there things people can do in the face of a potential drought this summer?
I'm glad you brought it up as far as personal gardens and smaller areas. It's very similar to a question that was asked to Brian earlier about compost, because using compost and mulch in smaller areas like that is something that's pretty easily doable. We do have some programs for that, but doing it on a large scale, 100 acres of mulch, 100 acres of compost, or in many cases, 500 acres of that is really pretty much an impossible task to do. But on these smaller fields, so in your personal gardens, your flower beds, and even in your yard, that is something that can help, and that really does lessen you're keeping it covered. You're blocking the radiant energy of the sun from drying that soil out. So that's all going to help your plants have much more vigor going into the summer and during the summer as well. It helps to keep that moisture in that soil.
Great. And I know sometimes drought, there's a lot of predictions that can happen with it, but it is very unpredictable. Are there specific initiatives that you guys are working for do those principles change as sort of the conditions and drought conditions change, or are the principles the same regardless of the conditions that we're seeing in our land?
The principles are the same. Of course, there's some things that you may not be able to do. We were just down in South Texas last week and working with some producers down there, and it's a big cultural difference that's there. When I'm here in Temple, Texas, so most of your crops are starting to come up mid-August, during September, stuff like that. The weather starts to get cooler and we start to get those fall rains, things like that. Well, that doesn't happen in South Texas. In South Texas, they're harvesting in mid-July. And so they're harvesting in the middle of the summer. So putting in cover crops when it's still that dry is a challenge for those producers and that. And so we're still actually kind of trying to figure some of this out. We're doing this a little bit in some of those areas, and it's kind of, or what we're finding is it's kind of like one of those, if you build it, they will come type of issues, where when you start to change those management systems, it becomes a little bit easier. The photo that I had from Guadalupe County, that was from September, so it was a little bit after they had harvested, and there was still moisture in that field. And so if you have moisture in that upper 6 inches of the soil, you can get those cover crops to germinate in that. And so that and when we do see a lot more moisture in those soils that are being managed that way. One of the fields we looked at last week, part of it was blowing sand, and then another part of it was ponding water. So we're still trying to figure that one out. The very same field, 100 yards from each other, you have completely different issues there. But again, that was conventionally tilled. It was farmed flat. They plowed it probably multiple times since their last crop was in it, and there's just no structure left on it. About a mile down the road, we saw some alfalfa that's ready for its second cutting of the year. So, and there's still moisture in that soil. So it does make a big difference in that management. And again, it does not happen overnight. Don't think that, oh, well, I did this, and so 2 months later I'm going to have this real healthy soil. It doesn't actually happen overnight like that. It does take a little while for that to change, but it does come. And usually we're seeing that it takes about at least 3 years for us to start to see that difference. The good thing is some of our programs, we typically have financial assistance for the producers for about 3 years in that program as well. So it gets them over that hump, so to speak, and then they can decide, okay, is this management the way I want to go, or do I want to revert back to what I've been doing all along? And I do want to emphasize that we are voluntary we're a volunteer basis on that. The producers do not have to follow what we're providing for them. We're just providing them that information, that knowledge, and that the assistance that's available for them. But they make their own decisions as to how they want to manage their land.
Sure. That's good to know, because I was going to ask about the timeline. So that 3 years point was
Awesome.
really important. Thank you. I thought I saw a hand, but I don't see it anymore. Are there any more questions for Dennis? Dennis did also include his contact information at the beginning. Oh, sorry, this got cut off. At the beginning of his presentation, so it's available in the chat and it will be sent out with the follow-up. So as a reminder, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. If you did RSVP for the webinar, you will receive the email with the presentation slides and a link with that recording. It's also going to be on NCTCOG's Environment and Development YouTube channel. You have the link here to the Water Resources page as well, which this will be posted under the webinars banner. I am going to invite you to take a brief survey to provide your feedback on this webinar. We always love to hear what we're doing well, what could be improved, and any ideas you have for future webinars. So I really appreciate all of the feedback, and it will be received and incorporated into additional future webinars. So thank you so much again for attending. I want to thank Brian and Dennis for sharing their wealth of knowledge with us. I appreciate you all joining us. We're going to end for today. Have a great rest of your day.